Good evening. It's a pleasure to be with you all tonight, and you've just seen an extraordinary film about a visionary, as Blair Underwood said at the start of this screening, in Melissa Haizlip, who brought us all soul. We have an extraordinary panel tonight to discuss the achievements of this film and what it has introduced really to the world. Before doing so, I just want to offer a few remarks and set of thanks and introductions before we begin. First, I'd just like to note that this film is probing, expansive, capacious, and as a result, it has won, as it deserves, many awards, multiple awards, including a Critics' Choice Award for Best New Director, and it's been nominated for a Cinema Eye Honors Award. I want to offer a set of thanks to our host tonight, the Executive Director, Liba Gift, and the Head of Programming, Lorraine Sace, for allowing us to convene here tonight. And if I may, on behalf of the Museum of Tolerance at large, I want to express our appreciation to all those who worked on this wonderful film and to the incredible panelists whom I'm about to introduce. One more individual in the audience deserves our special thanks, and that is the producer and director and writer Melissa Haizlip's mother, Cherie Taylor Hayslip, and Melissa's father, Dr. Harold Hayslip, who are longtime friends of the Museum of Tolerance. Cherie did a public presentation at the museum, as well as special programs for educators and professionals on her book, The Sweeter the Juice. The museum was able to honor her as a Southern California Freedom Sister, and she was included in that exhibition that complemented the Smithsonian's traveling exhibition, Freedom's Sisters, when it was at the museum in 2011. So welcome to you both in the audience tonight. And now I'd like to introduce our panelists briefly. Their bios are at the bottom of your screen, so you can see their extensive work and read about them if you're not already familiar. I should just say, as we have our conversation after I offer these introductions for about half an hour, we'll open up for questions, and please feel free to put your questions in the chat and I'll look out for them and bring them up. First, I want to introduce Nikki Giovanni, poet and activist. I think many of us would say America's foremost poet, one of our most celebrated. She's written many books, 12 children's books, 8 nonfiction books, and released 10 spoken word albums, but the genre for which she is best known is, of course, poetry. And I want to also salute her most recent volume of work, Make Me Rain, which she wrote for Toni Morrison, as she's mentioned, after the passing of her mother, which was published in October of this year. She appeared on Soul, performing and hosting on numerous episodes, including her landmark 2-hour interview with James Baldwin, filmed on location in London in 1971. Melissa Haizlip is with us as well. She is our producer, director, and writer, and the niece of Melissa Haizlip. She is a pioneer, extraordinary work all around, but focused largely on critical issues at the intersection of racial justice, social justice, activism, and representation, all with an emphasis on elevating the voices of women and people of color. Alongside this award-winning filmmaker we have in Melissa, we have Doug Bush, who's also here. He is the co-producer of Mr. Soul and is an Academy Award-winning director of 20 Feet from Stardom, that documentary.
I was the editor of that.
Editor, yes. I'm sorry if I misspoke. Of 20 Feet from Stardom, which I love, and many other projects, again, which you can read about it in the bio. So thank you all three for being here. I want to begin with a question about the stakes, really, of Soul. And I want to begin really with a question for you, Nikki Giovanni. Nikki, if I may, Ms. Giovanni.
Nikki. Please, Nikki.
Okay. When the clip of you speaking with James Baldwin from A Soul was put out on social media, it went viral, right? And there were many aspects of that conversation I'd like to discuss. But I just first want to ask you to take us back to that moment, and what was it like to have that conversation with James Baldwin then, and how has it informed your thoughts about how you make work, say, now?
Well, first of all, Ellis owed me, and as Melissa will know, I worked with Soul, and he and I would talk once a week. Who should we have? How should we handle it? And we did a lot of things. But he would just come and we would talk. And at the end of the year, Ellis realized he owed me, which he did because I wasn't working for him. I was working with him. And he said, "Well, what would you like?" Now, everybody who knows anything about me knows I'm a foodie. And so I think that Ellis was really thinking, okay, I'm going to take her to the restaurant. You know, Jackie Kennedy used to go to that restaurant. He said, you know, whatever. And he said, "Well, what would you like?" And I said, "I would love to talk to James Baldwin." And he said, "Well, I know." And he called him at that point, Jimmy. He said, "I know Jimmy." And I was just like, my eyes like, oh my God, you know. And he said, "I'll call him and see what he thinks." I had seen a film, talk actually they were doing with Baldwin, and Baldwin's home, which was wonderful. It was one of those old country houses over in St. Paul de Vence, and the fireplace was really high, was tall. And I had seen my book, Spin a Soft Black Song, which is a book I wrote for children. So I had some idea that he might know that I might write, but I had no idea he would actually take the time. And Ellis called him, and Jimmy said, "Yes, but I don't have time to come to America. Would she mind coming to London?" And I said, "Ellis, you got to be kidding. Of course I'm coming. Of course I'm coming to London." And I went, my son Thomas went, and and I'm so sorry, we lost her to cancer, Debbie Russell, who was my babysitter. Debbie was a student of mine at one point. And so the three of us, you know, when we went to London. And to some degree, to be honest, I was nervous because he's James Baldwin and I'm not. And I was thinking, well, you know, I'm going to make a fool of myself, but you know, it won't be the first time I've made a fool of myself. So let's go. And so there were things that I wanted to ask him about because we had these 20 years between us. I'm 20 years, I was 20 years older. So there were some things that I was wondering, well, what are you thinking about this? And what are you thinking about that? And that's the conversation just began to flow from that. And Jimmy, as we all know, those who know him, Jimmy is a night owl. So one of the things that we were doing was that we were filming at night because he was ready at about 11 o'clock. He was ready to go out to dinner. And he, of course, had lots of friends in London. I am not, I'm not friendly and I don't have a lot of friends. So at 11, I had my son and my babysitter. So we were going to bed at that hour. And the funniest thing really, I wish that Jimmy were here to hear that because he knows it's fact. The funny thing is, in the morning, if you have a child, any of you who have children, in the morning, we would be up, and I say we would be Debbie and Tom, we would be up for breakfast. And Jimmy would just be coming in because he had been up all night, you know. And Thomas, I don't know, Thomas just fell in love with him. And Jimmy was a very nice man. And so Thomas would see him in the kitchen, in the breakfast room, and he'd say, Jimmy Baldwin, take me for a walk." And Jimmy would go, "Oh, Thomas, I don't," you know, it's like, wow. And the hotel that where we stayed was in right there in Margaret, Princess Margaret's grounds. They have changed since then, but it was about a mile. And Thomas was like, "Take me for a walk, take me." And so there was nothing to do but take him for a walk. And so Jimmy would grab a cup of coffee and he would walk Thomas. And it was really just funny. Then Thomas and I would go and Debbie went to see some other things too. I wanted her to see, she was just a young woman I knew, and I wanted her to see London, to see the museums and stuff. And I took Thomas to ride on the whatever was out there, you know, to do the things. And then we'd come in and have dinner. And about that time, Jimmy was ready to wake up and do something. And that's it was really I was nervous, but the more I talked to him, the less not the less nervous, but the more I wanted to defend my own point of view. And I think that that's
Yeah.
what some of the
Mhm.
young women who are looking at that now,
Mhm.
I think that's one of the things they hear, that even though he was or is Jimmy Baldwin, he, I still had a right to defend my point of view.
That's
And
right.
that's what I was trying to do.
That's right. You know, and I want to almost revise what I said in the film, Mr. Soul. I mentioned that there was a mentorship that I saw, but in rewatching the interviews, I see it as over time, once you get about 40 minutes in, an hour in, this full exchange of equals really in different generations. So it's an intergenerational conversation that I saw happening. And there are lots of questions to ask you, but I think the one that for me is most kind of important in the context of this conversation is, what do you think it was about the context of Soul as a platform that allowed for a conversation to move from being you interviewing James Baldwin to you having that kind of an exchange? Could it have happened anywhere else, for example?
I doubt that it could have happened any place else. And it did become a conversation. And if you recall, Jimmy came back to the States and ended up walking with Martin and doing a number of other things. I had nothing to do. He was always a civil rights person, so I do not wish to be misunderstood about that. But there was another thing about, as we look at our responsibilities as writers, one of the things is to write, and another thing is, what do we do? And so that's a part of the conversation. And I looked recently at Fences and August Wilson, and looking at that, it was very interesting because the mother, the wife, was saying to the husband, he was saying, well, I've lost everything, and this is all I have, about his mistress.
Mhm.
And she was saying, you don't think I was lying? You don't think that I was pretending with you? And it was a question that had come up previously between Jimmy and me, because he said to me, you don't understand the pressures of Black women, Black men. And I had to come back with, but you're not understanding the pressures of Black women. You don't think that we smile because we think it's a good thing to do? We're not that damn happy. And I always remember the expression on his face, because nobody had ever said to him, no, wait a minute.
That's right.
What about the women?
That's right.
What
That's right.
about how they're looking at things? What about they're trying to do to hold things together? And I think that that's when the conversation it went click, and we went someplace else. And it was very interesting that somebody like me, I mean, I'd only written a couple of books and he was James Baldwin, could finally make sense, could finally come into his mind to say, oh, I hadn't thought about that.
Well, it's not, what to me makes it not a surprise is that part of the genius of Ellis Haizlip was to be able to discern who was on the way to becoming, right? And he saw that in you, and he saw this in so many others, and that's what made the constellation of artists there explosive in terms of it offering a time capsule of what would happen in the future, right? Who needed to be put on a stage for all time, right? And so the conversation you had with James Baldwin I think, is one great example of that. And I want to come back around to it, but I want to ask of both our producers here, why make a project about soul now? What are the stakes of telling the story today?
Well, I think, first of all, thank you so much, Sarah, for being here and joining us. And thank you, Nikki Giovanni. It's so wonderful to have you as well. And Doug and the museum. Thank you so much for having us. It's a wonderful evening. This is such an important moment that we're in. It feels like we are on the verge of a great racial reckoning, and there are so many conversations that need to be had, and we can learn so much from the revolutions of another time when there are so many parallels there between what happened 50 years ago and really what's happening now. We almost have the same villain in Nixon as we have in the administration now. And there's so many parallels that I've realized how important it is to understand how far we've come and yet how far we have to go to sort of achieve this fairness and this realization of our greatness. That's always the thing. Black people are strivers. And there you can see that they were striving, but not just striving and demanding, but needing to reimagine ourselves on this American landscape. And it feels like we are on the same kind of precipice right now. We can reimagine ourselves in culture, in art, in politics, as women leaders, with a Black woman in the White House very soon, next month. So there's so many parallels there, and the way that culture creates change and the way Ellis Haizlip curated that culture and pushed the culture forward, we need to stand on those shoulders, those great shoulders, the shoulders of greatness, in order to move forward. And he was such a quiet revolutionary. We can learn so much from that as well. Our voices are much more louder, and we wear our politics on our sleeve, which he didn't necessarily. But I think that this is a wonderful opportunity to remind ourselves of our greatness.
That's right.
I agree. I mean, there's a reason things happen, right? And Melissa, who is the most fierce and warrior-like, amazing director, has fought for so long to get this movie done just the way it was always meant to be. And the time's caught up to the movie. That's what I'm so proud of this film for being out there, because this is the time we're going to need this dialogue. This is the time when we're going to need this presence to see we've been here before and we can learn so much from these incredible artists and leaders, and like Ms. Giovanni, who's done so much. Nikki, you've been such an important influence and force for so much good. And now we get to recreate those conditions again and have this dialogue. And I'm thrilled that it's coming out now. This is like the time it was meant to be, you know? It's the only film that I've worked on in a long, long time where an audience gets up in the middle and cheers, you know? That's a very special thing, where there are moments where the entire audience is together in one moment and they're cheering in the seats. 20 Feet from Stardom was the last time I saw that. And this has that magic. It has that power to move an audience with the force of the people in it. And I'm so proud of this film. So yay, Melissa, thank you for doing this.
Melissa's absolutely a crusader.
If I may say, I'm so proud to have been a part of that. And I always want to mention a wonderful woman, Novella Nelson. And we need to remember, and at some point, somebody, I'm not capable, but that is something you might want to do. We need to do something to show the influence of Novella on all of it, because I did a part of it. You know, as I said, Ellis would come up. I lived on Amsterdam Avenue, and my next door neighbor actually was Morgan Freeman. But he would come up and we would talk. But every week he would also talk to Novella. And she had a lot to do with how the stage looked and how we treated how people were treated. That she was the one that said, no, we have to have makeup. We have to have hair done. We have to have people dressing a certain way. And it's because of her influence on being on the stage. And at some point, Melissa, when we not get through, because we won't get through, but as we add to this, we need to add Novella and how important she was. And of course, Ellis, loved her, and Novella just meant the world to him. And she too was a big help.
Yeah, and luckily we have that in the very beginning, that tribute to her in the beginning, because she was also on the very first show and one of Ellis's dearest friends, and she was his muse, and she was actually the face of soul, that beautiful, graphic explosion that you see that's completely 100% original. It was her face that is on there. Yes, so she is very much, and we actually dedicate the film to her as well. This is a very special tribute to her and all that.
It's a great loss. Yeah, I'm glad. I mean, losing her was a great loss. That's the truth. So yeah, I didn't mean that you hadn't. I just meant.
Oh yes, no, she deserves her own movie.
They don't know her, and so we need to. You always are mentioning the people that we forget. We do have. I'm a Delta, and of course, our new vice president is an AKA, and we're very proud of the AKAs. But of course, if the Deltas hadn't walked away and become the Deltas, things might have been different in terms of voting, and these things might happen. But I was doing an interview and somebody was saying, well, what do you think is the first thing that Vice President Kamala Harris should do? And I said she should put a statue up of Fannie Lou Hamer. Because Miss Hamer, when she, you talk about standing up, Miss Hamer stood up to Lyndon Johnson and said very quickly, because Johnson offered her those 2 seats. And she looked at him, who was the president of the United States, Lyndon Johnson at that time. She looked at him and said, we didn't come here for no 2 seats. Knowing that going back to Mississippi was going to be the most horrible thing, because they pulled that bus over when she crossed the line, and they beat her and beat her and beat her, which is one of the reasons that no matter what, I will always vote. But I had to say that, that I think the first thing that, I know there are other things that should be done, but I would love to see a statue of Fannie Lou Hamer, because she has meant the world to all of us, because she stood up.
Well, so the ethos she embodies of a fearlessness. Fred Moten actually was just speaking about, well, first your work, Nikki Giovanni, in the New York Times, saluting your constant relevancy to the moment that we're in now. But he's also speaking about Fannie Lou Hamer recently in terms of understanding how she embodied the ethos that we all need to understand about how to speak up to power. I completely agree. But this also, when I was thinking back to just how incisive and unique the platform of Soul was, is what distinguishes it as well. The fact that it was live and didn't allow you to predict what flame-throwing event would take place is, I think, what also creates such an extraordinary product in Soul, and something that we don't have today, for as much as we have extraordinary directors working and creating new material that showcases and honors Black life. That live component, that fearlessness with which everyone came, to the stage, was something to behold. And Nikki, your conversation with James Baldwin really spoke to that. There are ways in which, and I mentioned this to you before we came on together, in one of your recent books, A Good Cry, you were writing about some of the very topics to do with Black masculinity and love and relationships that you were talking about with Baldwin, and maybe even introducing him to understanding at that time. So there's a continuation of that fearlessness today in your work, as I see.
Yeah, but wouldn't you just love to see Melissa have a show on CNN or MSNBC? Yeah. And I would, that her uncle, that she would be another step. And I really like, and that's the truth, I really like Joy Reid. It's not personal. And Don Lemon made me angry at one point, but I got over it, because remember Lemon said, well, where are the celebrities when they were doing Black Lives Matter? As if the women, and they were the 3 women who were doing it, needed celebrities to make what they were doing acceptable. So I would love to have somebody like Melissa having a show. If I could write somebody and make them do it, I think it'd be the most wonderful thing. The Niece of Soul, or the Memory of Soul, something like, I think it'd be just wonderful, so that we could discuss some of those things that need to be discussed.
What do you think about this, Melissa?
I love it. I think we need a platform for our voices, and we need that same sort of unapologetic opportunity to be ourselves, especially now as we're redefining ourselves, and this sort of parting of the ways of the old structures and the new beginnings that we have to take post, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, this horrific moment we've come through. And I love that line that James Baldwin says when he says, we have come through something. And if we can get this far, we can get further. And I think of that all the time. I wake up in the middle of the night thinking, his words are so prescient. It's exactly what we need to hear right now. And maybe even if it's not me, maybe it's the next Ellis Hayslip. Maybe it's just this idea of freedom of expression at a time when we really need it the most. Mm-hmm. And it might be another platform that's not as commercial and it might be more diasporic. You know, there's lots of things happening all over the world, in Panama, in Cuba, in Africa. There's so much art that we are, you know, I was just on WBAI this morning with Felipe Luciano, and we were talking about that, how Ellis Haizlip was global, and he saw art and opportunity in all places that were beyond the imagination or beyond the restrictions that have been placed upon us. And now that we are more of a global community, and well, we're not going very far right now, but you know, we are traveling at least at the speed of our internet access, and we can be global beings. We have to be in order to be completely diasporic in our intention and our intentionality around curating the culture and all the cultures that create art.
Yes.
Couldn't agree more.
Here, Melissa. Yes.
I don't know that we have certainly time for questions. If they come into the chat, we're certainly excited to have them from you. But as you think of your questions, I should say, Felipe Luciano's quote that I love in the piece is that the program was so beyond its time that it was in time. Right? In that sense. And there is, it was shot out of time. And this brings me around to a question I wanted to ask of you all. What Felipe Luciano was upset about the ending of Soul. He wanted there to be agitation around funding it when it was being defunded and effectively stopped through that process. But the response that Ellis Haizlip had was very different. Right? His sense was that he understood its value, and he didn't necessarily want to use what he called the tactics of protest, right, and the street to keep it going. Why do you think that was? And what do you think it would have resulted in if he had been able to keep going for a few more years?
I think probably, if you're asking me, one of the most important voices in America, and I mentioned him earlier, was Walter Cronkite. Mm-hmm. And I mentioned Mr. Cronkite. I didn't know him, of course, but he had a voice that you could trust. And Ellis had a voice that you could trust. So if we had continued, we would have had, for example, the athletes kneeling before, kneeling when they're playing the so-called national anthem. And we would have had somebody, like me, pointing out that men kneel on one knee when they ask a woman to be theirs, to love them, to marry them, to be a part of their lives. And the athletes have kneeled for the anthem. And they are asking the United States, will you be mine? And the United States has yet to answer yes. They are asking, will you marry me? Because you come and you watch me play, you watch me do everything. Will you be mine? And right now, I'm living in Virginia. The answer has been, well, we're not really sure. Or we don't want our sons to marry you. Or we don't want our daughter, And I think that kneeling is so important. So Ellis would be the person who would bring out, what does it mean when an athlete kneels on one knee for America? He's asking, will you marry me?
It would be the place to
be discussed
for serious conversations about topics that might not make it to an MSNBC or CNN.
Or anything. They don't want to talk about it that way. But isn't that what happens when you get married? Don't you? Isn't that what happens?
I love that. I'm thinking about Ava DuVernay getting ready to shoot the Colin Kaepernick, documentary, and thinking about the symbolism of that supplicant kneeling position. Thank you for that new reading on it. The
so there are things that Ellis would have brought up that are not being brought up now.
Yes.
And I'm not blaming I'm not saying that anybody's short. I'm saying that some of this has to go back, and we have to say, well, how did this come? And why did this come? And what does it, am I making sense? And if we had Ellis, we could, somebody like me, some crazy fool, be sitting there saying, well, what about? And we could get another kind of conversation going that needs to be had. That needs to be had.
Yes. Melissa, I think you're on mute there.
Oh,
Yeah, sorry about that. That's going to be my next show. Melissa, you're on mute. No, I'm kidding. No, I was going to say that I think there's something to be said, especially when you look at this wonderful time capsule that the Soul Archive inadvertently creates, or actually deliberately creates, I'm sure. And you see this notion of value, and we are still in a giant fight around who gets to ascribe value to culture and to, right now, people of color, our aspirations, our dreams. And so there's something very beautiful about everything that Alice Haizlip did by curating the culture and showing a large array of, different types of people, artists, different viewpoints, the complexity of Black life that's not a monolith, and saying, we already have value. It is intrinsic. It already exists. We don't have to prove ourselves. We don't have to be singing and dancing and shucking and jiving, but we are just going to show you and share with you the beauty of Black art, Black love, Black sister and brotherhood. And this idea of not having to ascribe value to that it just is. And so now as we fight for our own, futures, comes back to the same question about who gets to ascribe value in art, value in films being able to be successful, for example, or who gets to do what. And this is what drives me crazy, and why I would love to see a type of show that reevaluates in no pun on the word value, but this idea that Black culture is already great. Black excellence is already there. That's innate. We don't have to discuss that. And we don't have to ascribe value to it. And we don't have to jockey between what's important and what isn't. And then that will take us to a new level. That's the show I want to see, because that's what Ellis was doing with Soul, I think.
That's so right. What I loved about Ellis is it was so above the fray in some ways, and he didn't want to make it easy for the show to be critiqued as, oh, it's just part of this revolutionary movement, and it didn't have this wider diaspora of so many influences and so many global influences as well. It's not just an American thing; it was more than that too. And the fact that he represented that in the show, that makes it a little easier to understand why he was ready to not make it into this street action thing. And I know Felipe that's a wonderful scene where Felipe is, come on, we got to save it. He said, let it go. We've done what we need to do. But I got to say, in the end, I'm with Questlove. It's like, can you imagine if this was every day from then until now? It's like, there's so much we need to discover still. And the show needs to come back.
We're so fortunate to have had it, and so fortunate that you have made this just transformative film. I think that ignites the imagination to allow us to think about what's possible in the landscape of media when you allow for all of the arts, all of Black expressive culture to have a place to gather, celebrate, and build upon each other. Where else could you have a place that poetry is being celebrated alongside dance, right? And spoken word of all kinds, and you name it. This was the place where all that could happen, thanks to, again, this visionary in Alice Hayslip. I think my last sort of comment I would make is, I don't know if he would have predicted that his niece would be the one to continue the legacy onward. I don't know if you had conversations about this work that he was doing, but I find it such a poignant tribute to the way in which legacy and lineage can come in perhaps unexpected ways. So I'm really moved by the intergenerational quality of this conversation on multiple levels. You, Nikki Giovanni, speaking with James Baldwin, not knowing if you were ready for that stage, and then finding that you were speaking as a true interlocutor with him. And you, Melissa, attributing your uncle effectively as an award-winning filmmaker in your own right. It's just extraordinary. And you continuing the work you've been doing alongside Melissa. This is just a tribute on multiple levels to the work that we do together intergenerationally. So I don't know if you have any other comments you'd like to make, but I just want to salute you all and just mention that I don't want the conversation to end. I know that
I have one thing I want to say, because it's no accident, of course, that you're here, Sarah, because the work that you do, I have to say, is so much in line with what Ellis Haizlip has done. I don't know if you remember when I first met you, I said, you to me are the embodiment of soul. You are the next generation. You are carrying on the legacy, the way you have curated the culture, the way you've put these books together. I'm sorry, I have to show the Vision and Justice books, which are just fantastic. And yes, I have both copies because I couldn't decide which one. So everyone jump out and get those. But this idea of putting, the idea of visibility of culture and the curation of the stories, the voices, the artists, that is exactly what Ellis Haizlip was doing. And I feel with your work at Harvard and all of your work everywhere you do, and your talks, your TED Talks and your beautiful Q&As, I think you are an embodiment of that spirit. And we are so lucky to have you. And I just want to thank you so much for the furtherance of this journey that you are on and that you are taking us on as well. Thank you so much.
Oh my goodness, thank you so much. So kind. We're all carrying different torches in this relay race, right, with each other. And I'm trying to do my part in the way that I can. It certainly is inspired by Ellis Haizlip. It's really such a discovery to see the model that I've been living with, not knowing that there kind of was one, right, for so long. And here he came. And I want to thank you, Melissa, for including me in the film. That was a real pleasure and honor. And Doug, again, I don't want to let you all go, but I've been told that we have to stop at 9:25 or so. Oh, I'm sorry. We have one question from the audience. Can we ask this question? Yeah. All right. Museum of Tolerance, if this isn't acceptable, you tell me in the chat, but I'm going to ask the question. Okay. The question from the audience is, what was Mr. Haizlip's focus in his later years? What was his ongoing passion? I think I might know the answer, but I'd love to hear any one of our people.
Absolutely. Well, one of the things that he wanted to do was to continue this idea of Black institution building. In the 70s and the early 60s, Ellis Haizlip tried to build as much as he could. He actually was a part of the Alvin Ailey Company board. He was best friends with Ailey when Ailey only had a few dancers, I think a number of 6, and he was the first person to produce the Alvin Ailey Company on tour, and was always saying, we need institutions. There is such a thing as Black ballet. There is such a thing as Black art and dance, just as you see it everywhere else. And so he was constantly trying to build these institutions. He worked at the Schomburg Center with the same impetus behind that, creating a larger footprint, taking the Harlem Library, New York Public Library, and turning it into a cultural mecca. And this notion of the furtherance, always with the same, sort of the same curation of art and culture that he did on soul, he pulled that into the 80s and the early 90s. It was always very important to find the artists and make sure that they were able to have the platforms that they needed, whether he was supporting them and creating very special places for them to work and live, work, different places where they could live and work at the same time. That was unusual, trying to get zoning for that. And just really creating larger opportunities. He had a wonderful event at the Lincoln Center called Soul at the Center, and he made a 2-week Black arts showcase that lasted for 2 years in a row, and where he brought all the great artists that had been on television into Lincoln Center, which, believe it or not, had never had a collaboration with the Black community because it was so new. And so for the first time, you were seeing everything from hair braiding to Tina Turner opening at Lincoln Center, which was remarkable. This idea of needing more room, demanding more space, and creating vibrations of culture in these white spaces so that everyone would know when it came to culture that Black people have been here and that we have created vibrations that will last into the future, that will further our opportunities to make more art. So he was always looking to the future. He's somewhat of an Afrofuturist, if you will, finding ways to create better opportunities and expanding horizons for artists to look past the restrictions that have been placed upon them, and to dream bigger.
Yeah, yeah.
And he actually produced, and it's hard to say produced about a ceremony, a going home ceremony, but it's important to say that he did produce James Baldwin's funeral or going home ceremony at the Cathedral of St. John the Divine. That was a very special, and also Alvin Ailey's. So these were very big, important cultural homegoing celebrations, and as well as welcoming Bishop Desmond Tutu from Africa for the first time. And so he was always doing these remarkable public events. Diana Sands and her passing as well at Lincoln Center. These acknowledgements and these great sort of cultural moments, he was shepherding those things all the way up until he passed as the director of special programs at the Schomburg Center, and also producing more television for PBS. And working with the Greeks as well. I know he worked with the Deltas and the AKAs and did a lot of things like that. So he was all about building the community.
It looks like in asking this question, we've had one more come in from the audience that it seems as if we're allowed to ask. And this is for both, well, for Nikki and for Melissa and Doug. What is next for you, Nikki Giovanni? And what is next for the film? And where can we see the film next? That's the question.
Well, I'm a big fan of the Godfather. And I saw that Coppola is now doing the coda. And I'm hoping that Melissa is going to think about where she might, I'm not answering for Melissa, I'm just thinking about where she might want to go. I have to make a correction. I try not to correct people, but the first person to have a show at Lincoln Center was me. And I worked with Packy McGinnis, and I did a show, and it ended up being Truth Is On Its Way. That was my Grammy nominee. And that was very good. And Ellis followed me with that because he wanted to do it. Ellis and I had, if we ever do a Nikki and Ellis, had an argument because he said he wanted to do Soul at the Center. And I said, Ellis, there's no point to doing Soul at the Center because it's New York. Do Soul in St. Louis. And I could not convince him to take it because he was a great producer. Take it to St. Louis because nothing, and nothing still is, was going on in St. Louis. If you can just look at St. Louis and imagine if we had taken Soul to St. Louis, not just the TV show, but the live, bring that live audience and bring those gospel, bring the spirituals, show the difference between the gospel and the spirituals, bring the poetry in. It would have taken it someplace else. He was a New Yorker, as Melissa knows. I know you all are from DC, but being a New Yorker, he wants to work in New York. And I understand that. I understood that. But I said, Ellis, we need to go to the Midwest. We need to go right on the Mississippi River. That's exactly. Can you imagine what would have happened if we had been able to just convince Ellis, let's move into, for just a year, let's move into St. Louis. Because the Black community, look at the blues, look at the songs that are about the St. Louis, look at it. And I just couldn't convince him to take that step. Yeah. And of course, we all knew Patrick McGinnis. We called him Packy. We all knew him. So working with Packy was going to be something that you could do. And it's nothing. And as I said, if you look at the dates, you'll see. But I did it and broke that door open. So my thought was, okay, now we didn't need Detroit because we had Motown in Detroit. We didn't need Philadelphia because we had Patti LaBelle and that group. We had the whole Philly group, and they were coming into soul, as you know, because we had not only Patti, but we had those boys that sang the Ivory, that lovely song, you know, the three teenagers, and we had people doing things, but there was nothing coming out of the place that had started it. We had Chicago, and you know, Chicago had a lot of the writing and had Don Lee and all of them were in Chicago. Gwen Brooks was in Chicago. If we had moved into St. Louis, it would have opened up a whole nother situation. I was sorry I couldn't convince him.
She has the directional map for you, Melissa, here. Oh, but I think the question also was about what's next for you, Nikki. I don't know if it has to.
Oh, nothing. I'm an old lady. I sit around and look at my fish. I went out today. It's cold, and I went out to make sure my fish were okay. That my heater was okay. I've got some goldfish. I wanted them to be all right, and that's what I do. And I like to write, and I like to pay attention. As I said, I pay attention to Colin Kaepernick. I pay attention to what's going on. But for what one of the things that people like me have to realize is that one, I am 77 years old. Nothing wrong with that. Actually, I recommend it. And I think that my job is to not get in the way. So when I'm asked, Melissa, whether it's Melissa, when I'm asked to do something, if there's any way I can do it, I try to do it. But I'm not looking for some of the stuff that some of the people are looking for. I don't want to be a star. I just want to be a part of the community. And I think that I do a decent job with that. I really like the girls. I like Black Lives Matter. I like what they did. Speaking of that, you look at what is growing up around you, and you like to feel that you're a part of it. I like to feel, and my latest book is called Make Me Rain. And it's because of all of the things that create life. Water is the most important. You can get along a long time without food, but you can't get along without water. Make me rain. Let me rain on you.
It's a gorgeous collection. And I was taken by the quote that was in the New York Times review of the book, in which you said that you recommend old age. You began by saying that, and you said that there's nothing as wonderful as knowing that you've done your job.
Yeah.
So beautiful. It's what we all aspire to. If one can live a life and say that, it's what a gift. Thank you for having done your job as you're calling it, because it's allowed for a world for the rest of us. So
Thank you. Thank you.
So Melissa and Doug, what's next for the film, and where can people see it next?
Yes, and thank you, Miss Giovanni, too. It's so wonderful to hear you. I feel like I just want to listen to you for hours and hours, and we're all so privileged to have you in our Zoom. This is just really unusual. But for the film, we do have a number of very exciting things to share, namely that we will have a PBS broadcast. So the film will be coming back to its rightful home on PBS during Black History Month. We do have an air date. It is Monday, February 22nd. And it's going to be so exciting to bring soul back to the origins, to bring Ellis back after all these years. It's the 50th anniversary of PBS. So there are a lot of, it's like a brief harmonic convergence of like all the best things. And it seems so right. So we're getting ready for the broadcast and delivering everything to PBS. We'll have pop-up events all around the country via Zoom, of course, staying safe. And those will be part of the Independent Lens broadcast. So very exciting to take this to a larger audience and a home in which it belongs. And after that, we will also have an educational distribution. So hopefully it will be in your university, Nikki, and then you can use it as a part of their curriculum. So we have recently signed with an educational distributor who will have the film out to over 1,000 universities by the new year.
Fantastic.
Good for you.
So
Yeah.
really, it's all about visibility. It's not just for the film, but it's for the artists. It's for all of you. You know, this is your legacy, and we always knew that we were standing in very big shoes and we weren't trying to fill them, but this idea of furthering the legacy and making sure that everybody knows about it. The visibility of these artists, even after all these years, is so key. So that's what we're hoping for.
Absolutely. Oh, you're on mute, Doug. Yeah.
That mute button every time. I have to be a good co-producer here and mention, if you want to share this to the audience, you can see it right now in digital cinemas. It's still available to watch as a ticketed digital cinema event. And if you go to www.mrsoulthemovie.com, all the details are there, and you can watch this movie right now, share it with your friends before our big broadcast debut and everything. So it's out there.
Yes, and one more time, it's www.mrsoulmovie.
Mr. Soul Movie.
Yeah, those are in there. But we're also on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, everywhere you can find us at Mr. Soul the Movie. So there's that. And please follow us. It's a grassroots organization here. It's a film that was funded entirely by grants, so we don't have any sort of sugar daddies in our corner. And really, it's the strength of the film and the beauty of the story that we want to share. And that's why we're trying to get it out as much as we can. So tell your friends about it. And if you had a great time tonight, please tell us about it and we'll stay in touch with you. We are the ones on all the social media because we believe in the film and we believe in this story. And we believe now is the time for the nation to heal and to heal through soul.
That's right.
I think we need this story now more than ever. And it really resonates right now too. So I think Ellis Haizlip is that voice that can heal the soul of a nation.
Absolutely, I completely agree. It's why I'm here. I'm so excited about this, to celebrate the excellence and the vision of this production. I think the last thing I would just say is that when Ellis would speak to the audience on Soul, he'd often say that he hopes that they could feel what was coming off of the heat of the television, you know, and there was this way that he wanted them to be right with him in that studio. And I hope that everyone watching tonight has felt that same electricity coming from both the film, but also from this conversation, because we're all as excited about it as we should be. I think that once you start watching the film, you have a sense of why it should be shared widely, taught widely. It will certainly be taught by me at Harvard and amongst my colleagues, absolutely. So I hope that this has provided the same spirit and energy that came from the Ellis Haizlip production tonight. And with that, I want to thank again the Museum of Tolerance and our host, but to you in particular, Melissa Haizlip, Doug Bush, and Nikki Giovanni. Thank you.
Thanks, Melissa. Call anytime.
Thank you, Sarah. Thank you, Nikki.
Oh, Sarah.
Thank you.
Yay, thank you.
Thank everyone for watching.
Yes, thank all you.
Everyone in the audience, thank you for being with us. Yes.